Tonight, power curbed.
I think this is really the court telling the president that there are limits to his powers.
The Supreme Court decision blocking the White House vaccine mandate for companies with 100 or more workers. This is another high court ruling allows a vaccination requirement for healthcare workers to stand. Plus, Democrats bowing out.
It's been a harbinger of a tough election cycle.
What a slew of retirements means for the party. And
the goal is high level of security and detection capability.
How new technology is keeping the TSA ahead of the threat. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A tough week in Washington for the Biden administration. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. In Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. The Supreme Court dealing a huge blow and striking down a key component of the president's vaccine mandates. The court blocking the vaccine or test rule for large private companies with more than 100 employees. That's our top story tonight. As Gary Lane reports, the Supreme Court sent a clear message to the administration. There are limits to the president's powers.
The highest court in the land issued a split decision on President Biden's vaccine mandates. The Supreme Court ruling Thursday 6-3 against the president's major requirement that employees of larger companies get vaccinated, test regularly, and wear a mask while at work. However, the court let the smaller mandate stand for most healthcare workers. Senator Rand Paul told CBN News the court got it right on the employer mandate because he says it was clearly unconstitutional.
Even Biden, in advance of this, was saying it probably wasn't constitutional, so he did it anyway, which is kind of ridiculous. But no, I think this is really the court telling the president that there are limits to his powers.
The court made its decision based on constitutional merits. Justice Neil Gorsuch argued the vaccine mandate issue is a matter of who decides policy. The president's regulatory agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, or other branches of the government. He wrote, quote, "The answer is clear. Under the law as it stands today, that power rests with the states and Congress, not OSHA." In an unsigned opinion, conservative court justices argued, quote, "OSHA has never before imposed such a mandate, nor has Congress. Indeed, although Congress has enacted significant legislation addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, it has declined to enact any measure similar to what OSHA has promulgated here." In their dissenting opinion, the liberal justices Breyer, Kagan, and Sotomayor argued that the court itself, not the executive branch of government, was overreaching by substituting its judgment for that of health experts. Republicans celebrated the ruling. But President Biden said he was disappointed that the court blocked common sense, life-saving requirements, grounded squarely in both science and the law.
This was a step that we announced and we had every intention of implementing because we knew that it was the point where putting in place requirements in the workplace would help get more people vaccinated. The good news is that a number of companies have already decided to do that and do that successfully.
On a 5-4 vote, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh joined the three liberal justices in allowing the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers to proceed. It's applied to providers receiving federal Medicare and Medicaid funding and affects some 10.4 million workers around the country. Medical and religious exemptions are still allowed. The president praised the court for that decision, saying it will save lives. Gary Lane, CBN News.
And joining us now, Sarah Parshall-Perry, legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Sarah, welcome. Great to have you with us this Friday. Take us a little bit deeper here. What does it mean that the Supreme Court blocked this vaccine mandate for larger businesses?
It's incredibly significant here. The court used its emergency docket, the shadow docket, to actually make a very significant ruling, pinning back the ears of the Biden administration on what has been a consistent bureaucratic overreach on the executive's attempts here. And this was now 2 for 2 on their losses. They also lost on the CDC eviction moratorium. The court there in the Alabama Realtors Association case just a few months ago said the same thing. It is beyond the scope of that executive agency's power to issue that kind of a regulation, whether or not there is a pandemic involved. And here with OSHA, they said that that statute does not give OSHA the authority or power to issue a vaccine mandate and affect the personal health of 84 million Americans. It was very significant.
Yeah, Gorsuch saying it's up to states and Congress. You know, a lot of these companies have been going out on their own to require vaccines for their employees. Sarah, do you think that we'll see that change now with this ruling?
Well, in fact, I do think that the OSHA mandate itself was in large part sort of a sword of Damocles hanging over the head of each of the states and the employers who were afraid of suffering crippling fines. So many of them actually went ahead and instituted their own vaccine mandates for their own private staff. So I think now we're going to see power returned to the states where it belongs, particularly on the nature of public health and safety as relegated under the 10th Amendment to the states appropriately. And I think we're going to see states and private employers respond the way they see fit and make their own determinations on what's best for their employees and citizens.
At the same time, the Supreme Court notably ruled in favor of vaccine mandates for healthcare workers. How is that different?
Well, here the court was tasked with determining whether or not the Medicare and Medicaid Act gave the power to the secretary to make determinations related to administering those funds. And because those funds are administered at hospitals and nursing home facilities where most of the individuals are either elderly, infirmed, or immunocompromised, the court in a 5-4 victory for the mandate determined that there was enough of a nexus there, that was related to the public health power of the secretary at HHS. So Justice Thomas, in a fiery dissent that was joined by Justices Gorsuch, Barrett, and Alito, said this is again upending the state-federal balance under the 10th Amendment. We're still going back to vaccine power that shouldn't belong with the federal government, but it should belong with the states, and we are inclined to agree with them.
The Marine Corps this week granted the U.S. military's first ever religious exemptions for the COVID-19 vaccine. Sarah, final question. Do you think we'll see more of this?
I think we're going to have to. Otherwise, we're going to see a flood of lawsuits. We've already seen a victory in achieving those exemptions from the Marine Corps and a victory coming out of the federal court down in the Northern District of Texas for 35 Navy SEALs who themselves were also victorious in a federal court and getting their own religious exemptions to the vaccine. I think we're going to see the Biden administration have to admit the fact that if you gain medical and administrative exemptions, you also have to grant religious liberty exemptions. That's part of how the system of constitutional government works.
Sarah Parshall-Perry with Heritage Foundation, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Well, as Omicron continues to spread rapidly in the U.S., hospitals across the country are experiencing critical staffing shortages, even as they face record numbers of patients. The Biden administration, though, says help is on the way. Military medical personnel being deployed to hospitals in some of the hardest hit areas.
Now, DoD is deploying 6 additional teams to Ohio, Michigan, Rhode Island, New Jersey, New York, and New Mexico. We will also be deploying an additional HHS team to Rhode Island. And in the next several weeks, we are prepared to do more.
We're going to have full hospitals and needless deaths.
President Biden says his administration will also send out 1 billion at-home rapid tests, along with making high-quality masks available for everyone. And starting tomorrow, private insurers are required to start covering the cost of up to 8 at-home tests a month. With that, let's bring in Greg Robinson, CEO of Diagnostic Service Center. Greg, welcome. It's great to have you with us this Friday. Let's start with the Supreme Court decision to strike down that White House vaccine mandate for big businesses. Where do these companies, Greg, go from here? How can they pivot to find other ways to still stem the spread of the virus?
So, Jenna, first, thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate the invite. We've all been faced with it, you know, and it can be a tough pill to swallow, but I think in a forward-thinking motion, it sends the message that Just as we were responsible for building our infrastructures, our business, our culture, our brands, our products, and our services brick by brick into our autonomy, that should continue. There's been quite a bit of overreach here. Businesses across the nation, we have our resources. We have the information that has been provided to health systems. We have the information that's been provided to the federal government. We have the information that's been provided by all of the doctors, by the World Health. I mean, we have the same resources and information. So we're going to be able to, and now be more empowered to put in place protective programs and reactive programs, because this is what we've been dealing with for more than 700 days. So now we've been more empowered to put together our own solutions within the parameters that fit our culture, that fit our manifesto, that fit our internal call to actions, and the people who report every day to our offices, believing in us in exchange for their time and ready to help Americans in all phases and all facets, regardless of the climate, power forward and continue to live whatever life status quo that we possibly can. So I think it's, in my own personal opinion, I think it's a wonderful thing. We're going to leverage our resources and get it done. We can protect ourselves as well. We know what to do. The information is there.
Yeah, a big part of that is probably going to be testing for a lot of these employers. But, as we see this increased testing with employers, what then for at-home tests? I mean, you still, in some parts of the country, you can't hardly find an at-home test.
It's like so many other things when we talk about healthcare, access to resources. Look, while I may not agree with everything the Biden administration has done, I think they've made a great push to ensure that at-home testing is a thing. I think everything has its wins and its losses, Jenna. So I think our ability to test at home is a powerful thing. Our ability to test at home and demand is a powerful thing. Supply chain is always going to be a thing whenever you start talking about a pandemic and a crisis of this kind of a climate. And there's going to be its wins and its losses. While especially me in the diagnostic space, while I empower people to take a proactive approach and test at home, there's also making sure that we collect enough specimen to actually conduct an accurate assessment of a sample. So there's so many other facets to it, but I think we'll get there in time.
All right. Greg Robinson, it's great to have you on this evening. We thank you for your time. Have a good weekend.
Problem. Thank you. You too.
And coming up, another great resignation of sorts. Democrats calling it quits on Capitol Hill. What that means for the party. Tonight, charges of seditious conspiracy in the violent riots breaching the Capitol last January. Stuart Rhodes, a founder and leader of the far-right militia group called Oath Keepers, now charged with seditious conspiracy, along with 10 other members of the group. The Justice Department says some of these people seen here going up the Capitol steps in tactical gear were part of a scheme to, quote, oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power.
They're in tactical gear. They have body armor. They're preparing for violence. I think what we saw was really an attempted coup to a certain extent.
And seditious conspiracy occurs when two or more people in the U.S. essentially conspire to overthrow the government. The charge is rarely used. ABC News reporting Stuart Rhodes' attorney says the government's case is built on nothing but lies. Well, to November and the highly anticipated midterm elections, an alarming trend for Democrats. 26 incumbents are retiring. Add to that the president's latest approval ratings, a mere 33% from Quinnipiac this week. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy says the real marker of President Biden's unpopularity is congressional Democrats deciding to call it quits.
It is now 26 Democrats have announced they will be retiring. That's more than any cycle since 1996. And as I've said from the very beginning, that number will get higher.
Democrats are retiring in even higher numbers than in 2010, when you might remember they were handed a devastating midterm defeat. CBN's David Brody explains why.
Roughly a year ago, top Republican leader Kevin McCarthy predicted the GOP would take back the House.
This is the smallest majority the Democrats have had in 100 years. We could do it.
That prediction looks pretty solid right now. So far, 26 Democrat incumbents are retiring this election cycle. On the Republican side, only 12 are walking away. That's not a good trend line for Democrats.
What does that say to you, Rick? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's indicative of the environment that Democrats know that they're in right now. By and large, the trend is more about people that are looking at the realities of how narrow the Democrats' majority is right now, how difficult an election cycle they're looking at, and are making a calculation that if they do get back to Congress next year, it's probably going to be in the minority.
This feels a bit like the 2010 midterms and could be even worse for Democrats. Back then, 37 in the party retired. It translated into a massive GOP pickup of 63 seats. Klein sees a similar pattern developing.
Traditionally, it's been a harbinger of a tough election cycle. So far, the retirement numbers are even above where they were during the Democrats' shellacking of 2010.
Typically, the party in the White House loses seats in the first midterm election. Still, Democrats hope some future policy victories will reverse course.
They will be able to talk about how we are fighting for and hopefully will have passed efforts to put in place universal pre-K, efforts to cut the cost of childcare, elder care, and make sure that we're investing in addressing the climate crisis. It is about a choice in this country, and we'd rather be us than them in that case.
That seems hard to believe with a narrow majority in both the Senate and House, along with President Biden's job approval below 50%.
This midterm election is shaping up to be particularly tough for Democrats. Because the Republicans are so close to the majority right now, the overwhelming likelihood appears to be that Republicans are going to win back the House.
With a titanic wave of retirements, the iceberg seems right ahead. David Brody, CBN News.
When we come back, staying ahead of the curve, how new technology is keeping up with new threats at the TSA. Well, do you just hate taking off your shoes at airport security? New technology might change that and increase national security to boot. Here's Caitlin Burke with a look at the TSA of the future.
The terror attacks of September 11th meant an immediate change in air travel, but enhanced security measures evolved over time.
Unfortunately, there's continued to have events that happen. You had the underwear bomber, which changed the way we looked at people screening, and all of a sudden body scanners became the norm. You had the shoe bomber. So there's all these events that took place, and so there's a lot of a reactive approach to it.
By being proactive, however, the TSA and its partners have worked to stay ahead of potential threats.
We need to continuously be innovative, and we need to continuously come up with new methods of improving security. We have to keep coming up with new methods of doing it, because our adversaries are also continuously looking at new ways to defeat what they know we have.
Kannan Krishnaswamy works at the U.S. Department of Energy's Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. One of its missions is national security, and researchers are behind many of the screening technology in airports today.
The portals that you go through with your hands above your head, that came out of the laboratory. In fact, we lovingly at the laboratory, we call this the PNNL salute.
Those scanners use millimeter wave technology.
That technology, the basic technology and the basic invention came out in the 1990s. We've had that system or that technology available since the 1990s. Now, there was no real need for commercial deployment or deployment in the airports, because airport security at that time was very different.
The initial technology was actually marketed to be used in apparel fitting.
You stand in the portals, get yourself measured so that you have exact body measurements that can be transferred to somebody that's making clothes, and they can fit clothes for you accurately.
Then 9/11 catapulted millimeter wave technology to the forefront of national security.
So that's the older generation of the technology that is currently being sold even today at the airports.
PNNL researchers are constantly working on taking their technologies one step further, and now a second-generation millimeter wave system is close to being deployed.
The way HexWave works is, first of all, it's a walk-through portal, and it uses radio frequency and real-time 3D video rate imaging, so we can determine if an individual has a threat on their body. We've trained it to ignore some of the common benign objects, so you won't have to divest. So your phone, your keys, your belt, wallet, watches, glass cases. We use the AI so we can provide automated decisions to a security operator to process people at speed.
Bill Frayne, the CEO of Liberty Defense, which developed HexWave, says the key differentiator between it and existing technologies is the ability to detect non-metallic threats.
And as you know, the people trying to do and defeat the system to do harm, they're being more creative. They're using 3D plastic guns, they're using liquid explosives. You know, they know that some of these metallic detection systems out there can't detect that.
Liberty has also licensed a shoe scanning technology from PNNL that can be used inside the HexWave or existing body scanners.
Imagine if you didn't have to take your shoes off at the airport. Talk about, passenger experience. That's probably top of the list when we talk to people who are going through the airports.
While this scanning tech is a few years away, the HexWave system will soon be deployed to screen aviation workers who access secure areas of airports. After that, the goal is for it to be used at all security checkpoints, allowing travelers to pass through without breaking stride.
The goal is high level of security and detection capability, but make it so that there's a low false alarm rate so you continue to process the passengers and make it a good experience.
Some other interesting technology coming down the pipeline includes the ability to differentiate between powders and liquids in baggage, and a way to detect explosives in their vapor form so that bomb-sniffing dogs are no longer needed. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Reagan National Airport.
Still ahead, a freezing phenomenon. See what's stopping people in their snow tracks next. Finally tonight, the main attraction, the swirling disc of ice, drawing tourists to Maine in the heart of winter once again. The frozen circle of water went viral back in 2019 after curiously forming in the middle of the Westbrook River. Ice discs form as a result of a current and vortex under the ice. Local business owners noticed the spinning ring earlier this week, but by Wednesday, freezing temperatures had halted the rotation. That didn't stop tourists, though, from visiting. Hopefully some warmer temperatures get that ice disc moving once again. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend.